welcome to my latest video. Also the continuation of the Sharksquig. So the previous video was looking at how to paint the shiny effect on the exhausts that are sticking out the side of him. And this video is pretty much a direct continuation on, and I'm going to show you how to paint the leather belt that goes just around the side underneath him. It's quite a simple process, quite quick as well, but it gives a really nice, very textured and sort of a unique look, which will help to separate it out from the other materials on the model. So I've already got like the kind of scratchy shark skin. I've got the shiny chrome, well not really chrome, but shiny metal look on the exhausts, and the obviously very dirty, rusty looking mechanical box thing below the exhausts. So this is going to be the same sort of thing, but again a separate texture. And I'm going to use kind of like a little trick to help me with that, to just make it look that little bit more different than the other textures on the model as well. To start with, I'm just using some Rhinox hide, blocking it all in. One thing to just be a little bit aware of is obviously there's a little edge that goes right up to the skin. Make sure you cover all of that. I know as I'm painting it here I haven't quite touched it, but you'll see in a moment that it's all filled in. So it's quite important to get that. Also, you're probably going to find that if you've built the model all as one piece like I have here, that the exhaust stack gets in the way of particularly this process, but all the detail painting really. So if you want to spend a little bit more time on the model than I am, then probably leave the exhaust off and then paint all these bits first. So this is the trick, the cheat that I was talking about earlier. And what I've done is I've got an old brush. Don't do this with your new brushes. I've just cut like about a third of the way off of it, and so it's kind of like a little tiny dry brush now. But I'm not so what I'm doing is the paint on the wet palette you see there is a Troll Slayer orange. Is taken directly from the pot and put onto the wet palette. I haven't mixed it with any water at all, so it's quite a thick paint. I think you can see that as I'm applying it. And all I'm doing is just loading up the tip of the brush, then I'm rubbing it off on some kitchen roll, and then just jabbing it onto the model. And it's leaving quite thick, heavy marks, very heavily textured. It's got a little bit of an effect like a dry brush. The only thing is as well, it's probably best to do this before you've finished the shark skin around it. So you can actually see there I haven't painted on any of the shark skin, so if I made any mistakes or I catch onto the skin, it's not a big problem. So don't paint or don't do any of the finished painting around the areas where you're going to be doing that, because the brush does kind of splay out a little bit. But you can see it's got all these nice little orange marks all over there. They're going to be painted over, so don't worry if they look a bit crappy as you're painting it, because it's just to get like some base paint marks on, and then you're going to paint the proper detail over the top of it, and it'll all kind of like blend in and just leave these subtle orange marks underneath. You can see I've started that now, so I'm using Bugman's Glow, and most of these marks, they're just scratchy marks again. So you can see I use this technique a lot all over the model. You can see the scratchy marks on the shark skin, scratchy marks on the dirty metal exhaust engine thingy, and then I'm using these little scratchy marks on the leather belt as well. But all the scratchy marks, they're all done slightly differently, and you can see here on this they're very much lots and lots of vertical lines. Now really it's a little bit easier if you turn the model upside down for doing the upper edges, because you get the best marks when you're pulling the paintbrush towards you, because what tends to happen is when you do the top edge, when you pull it down, you leave a little bit more paint where you take the brush off. Now with a bit of control you can sort of get around it, but it's more for your benefit really to see what the marks that I'm making rather than mine. So ideally, if I was painting this without it being on camera, for the marks that get the top edge of the belt and come towards me, I turn the model upside down to paint those. So if you look at the bottom edge, those are kind of like much easier to paint in, for the dragging towards me marks. And really it's just a case of sort of building these up. Now you can't really go too heavy with these, in terms of doing too many, but you can go too heavy by pushing too hard. You only want small amounts of paint on the brush, and you're just using the tip of the brush. If you have too much paint on the brush, then what you can do is leave a really fat mark, even if you're using a thin brush like I am. So I'm using a 00 Artist Opus brush, and that means that I can, I can push a little bit harder and go a bit quicker without worrying too much about leaving a fat mark. If you're using a larger brush, if you go too quick, accidentally push a little bit too hard, what you're going to do is end up with a much wider mark. So just bear that in mind. Like, obviously with a larger brush, it'll be able to hold more paint, so you could be able to do more marks, but it does mean that you just have to be a little bit more careful not to make larger marks. And also the larger brush means you have a higher chance of catching some of the areas with paint that you've already painted. And as I mentioned, the exhaust there does get in the way a bit, so with a larger brush, the chances are you're going to catch that. You can see here as well, now I'm changing the brush marks that I'm using slightly. So they're going a little bit smaller, and I'm just sort of filling in areas. So it's like more like the Sharksquig in terms of the scratchy kind of omnidirectional marks rather than all being vertical. But I still want to leave, like, the primary marks I want to be visible are the larger vertical ones, and these smaller scratchy ones, this is more kind of like a blending technique. So I'm just looking for small areas. So you can see here there's like a little hole in the belt, kind of like in between, so the spike at the front and the little clip at the side, there's a hole there. So I focus on that and I do more highlighting around it with the more scratchy marks, and I'm looking for little details like that on the area, just to do a little bit more blending. You can see, like, but you just have to be a little bit careful, because if you do too much blending, it takes away from the textured effect. And if you go too crazy with the Bugman's Glow and just do it all over and it starts to fill in the area, then you're going to lose out all the orange texture that you've already got on there. And you'll also lose a lot of the normal texture that you're painting. Just because, with a massive amount of texture build-up, it basically just becomes an opaque block. Then to just go into the sort of more finished areas for the details now, I'm going up to Kislev Flesh. Don't worry too much about getting these exact colours. You could do something like Morghast Bone, or you could just add a bit of white to the Bugman's Glow. It really doesn't matter too much, especially because you can always tweak the colours afterwards. So you'll see at the very end, I'm just going to I'll do a quick glaze over the top just to kind of help to blend in some of the colours, and also just to add a little bit more warmth back to it, because no matter how hard you try, if you keep adding lighter colours as I'm doing for the highlights, you are desaturating it. Now for leather, that's not too much of a problem, especially for the worn edges, because leather does get lighter on the worn edges and it can get really quite pale, but it's you still want to have some of that warm leather look in there, and you can have obviously some areas that are more weathered than others. So vary a little bit as you see fit, and depending on what areas, like larger areas there are that could do with a bit more weathering, and some areas that are more into the recesses, they probably need to be darker and more fresh looking for the leather. For these highlights, it's more of a case of just being delicate, just putting a few kind of little marks in here and there, because the Bugman's Glow highlight, that's the one that where you put all the major detail in, really. These final two highlights of the Kislev Flesh, and the final one is going to be Screaming Skull. They're just kind of like little refinements, just to pick out a few details, just to boost the contrast a little bit, make some of the details stand out a bit more. I mean, all these marks that I'm doing are actually very quick. The placement is kind of important, but you don't have to be too neat. And what you'll actually find is sometimes if you just kind of like are a bit scruffy with the marks that you're making, as long as they're in roughly the right place, the sort of the randomness of these marks, because you're just being sort of purposefully kind of chaotic with them, can give you quite unique and interesting looking marks. Whereas if everything is like super neat, it can get a bit boring and samey looking. So here we are with all the marks done on the leather belt. Now I'm just going to do some very quick glazing over the top using some Mournfang brown. Now normally I use a well palette for glazing, but I had some Mournfang brown on my wet palette already. I just added more water to it. So this is a really thick kind of glaze. If you see when the paintbrush touches it, the paint doesn't kind of flow back instantly, whereas if this was in the well palette, it just behaves like water. So this is a little bit thicker than a normal glaze that I would use, but it means that the marks that you're going to make on there, they're still clearly translucent. You can see all the marks underneath them, but it means you're going to add quite a strong colour to it. So it gets the job done quicker. If you wanted to do this like really neatly, again, just take your time. It's all the same kind of marks, same process, but you just take your time doing it. And there we are with the latest shot of the squig shark. So I've got a little bit more to do off screen, where finish off the rest of the skin and all that, and then I'm going to be showing you how to paint his kind of robotic leg in again a different way to the other metals on the model. So again, trying to push all the different surface textures and things. But anyway, that's the end of this video. Hope you enjoyed it. Quite a quick one, but hopefully there's a bit of interesting information in there. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.